In less than 2 hours, PM Albanese will meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. Joining me for some live discussion is our foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, always good to talk to you. So we just had a guest on a little bit earlier who says that China is not a security threat. He's been doing business with China for years. What do you think of that interplay between our security and our economics? Which comes first? Can we have one without the other?
Well, Leigh, it's great to be with you. There's an obvious tension in our relationship with China because they are our biggest export market. We make a lot of money out of them, but they are certainly our greatest security threat. And I'm sorry I didn't see the interview, but anyone who says China is not a security threat is either barking mad or taking something, untoward in their coffee, or just having a lend of you. Malcolm Turnbull discloses in his memoirs that China is the overwhelming author of cyber intrusions against Australia, cyber espionage, attempts to take to implant devastating backdoors in our technology, which they can use later on to deny service. We've had a long history now of Chinese Navy ships and aircraft taking grossly unsafe actions in order to intimidate our sailors and airmen in our region. China blusters and makes threats whenever our ships or planes go anywhere near the islands which they have illegally occupied in the South China Sea. Remember, China has taken an area equivalent to the Mediterranean, which the international courts have ruled it has absolutely no legal claim to at all. It has then also created artificial islands, and having promised President Obama that it would never militarise them, it has then militarised them. So it has now bases which can fire intermediate range missiles and hit Australia. It is trying very hard to establish a military base in the South Pacific, which would be a devastating consequence to us. It has been guilty of foreign interference in our domestic politics. I mean, the idea that this is not a security threat is just utterly ridiculous. Furthermore, President Xi Jinping himself, whenever he addresses his troops, he tells them to prepare for war, and he has also instructed them to be able to take Taiwan by force by 2027. So you add all that up, there's no inevitability to conflict, but to say China is not a security threat is just bananas.
How do you think the visit's going by our PM?
Look, I think this was an ill-advised visit. There's nothing wrong with visiting China, but at a time when the US alliance is in quite a lot of difficulty. We've got a left-wing Prime Minister who won't spend $1 on defence and a capricious president in Washington who doesn't put the traditional value on allies that should be put. So our core interest with Trump is to maintain the alliance and to maintain US involvement in Asia. Now, to choose this moment to do a 6-day trip to China, the longest single bilateral trip that Albanese has done to any other nation, to ignore our strategic partners and allies in the region, Japan and South Korea, by all means go to China, keep the relationship in good order, do 2 days or even if you like 3 in Beijing, 2 days in Tokyo and 2 days in Seoul, and have a proper balance. The Chinese government, we shouldn't call it China because it's got nothing to do with ethnic Chinese people. The People's Republic of China, the government in Beijing, loves to get small powers one-on-one and then either batter them into submission or flatter them into submission.
Charm them.
Xi Jinping, charm them. Xi Jinping says there's a cycle of cooperation and confrontation. Well, we've been through many confrontation cycles. We shouldn't be so grateful to Beijing that it has let us out of the doghouse, that we just turn over and beg them to tickle our tummies. Now, I think the Albanese government realised it was in a mess just before this trip began, so we had a tiny little burst of course correction and sort of itsy-bitsy hawkishness from the Albanese government just before the Prime Minister left. Penny Wong rediscovered the Chinese military threat, and Albanese said he won't back down on requiring the Chinese company to sell the lease of the port of Darwin, and we won't back down on foreign investment restrictions and so on. But why make this relationship such a big deal? They're going to buy our iron ore whether whether Albanese hugs a panda or not. Meanwhile, you're sending out all kinds of symbolism, and you're not having a frank discussion with the Australian people about the real security problems. I mean, if there is a war in our region, it will be between China and the US over Taiwan. We want to do everything we can to stop that from happening. The way we stop that from happening is having a stable system of deterrence, which would mean increased defence capabilities. Albanese won't do the one thing which could actually make war less likely.
But Albanese or the government might say we are keeping China happy and that will stop them from starting a war.
Yeah, but Lee, you'd know better than anyone. You know much better than me. Keeping China happy or being inoffensive has nothing to do with how China ultimately behaves. Nothing to do at all. Japan was in the doghouse for 10 years with Beijing, and Canada had its citizens
They're always
arrested
in the doghouse
and held as hostages. Yeah, that's true. Well, Canada had innocent academics visiting China arrested and kept as hostages because it served an Interpol warrant on a PRC national in Canada. Beijing makes these strategic decisions. Our ability to influence them is very, very tiny. This relationship was not stabilised because of brilliant statecraft in Canberra. It was stabilised because Beijing decided the wolf warrior phase had been damaging to its interests. Now, it has been a long-standing primary aim of PRC foreign policy to try to cleave Australia away, to try to pull Australia away from the United States. It's been a long-running primary Chinese policy object to kick the United States out of the region. Now, those two objectives are absolutely diametrically opposed to Australia's interests. So why give Beijing extra leverage?
Seeing as this visit so far is all warm and fuzzy, lovey-dovey, do you think the Port of Darwin issue is just going to be kicked down the road?
Well, I can't understand why it hasn't been resolved yet. And so the previous coalition government deserves massive criticism for this. They should have resolved the issue themselves. But they were chocolate soldiers themselves. They talk tough, but they did very little. And they also didn't increase our defence budget. I mean, this is a bipartisan failure. We don't want the Chinese company to own the port, so make them sell it. And if they can't find a good buyer, the government should buy it from them at a proper commercial rate. So there's no question of them losing money because of sovereign risk or anything like this. Now the Chinese press has started to threaten and intimidate the Australian government, saying if you do that, your iron ore sales might be at risk. In Chinese government-backed media are saying this. That shows you the nature of dealing with Beijing. Well, for goodness sake, just do it. Then it's done, and then they can't blackmail you anymore into not doing it. But because Canberra is so nervous, so fearful, so hesitant, if you want the company to sell the lease, tell them to sell the lease. If they won't sell it, then take it back as an act of government. Then the matter is done and resolved. At the moment, because a coward dies 1,000 deaths, and Australian governments are so cowardly, we're just trembling and in terror time after time. And what a trivial matter it is, as if the People's Republic of China would allow Australia to control any port in mainland China. I mean, the thing is just ridiculous. And so I think it should just be resolved straight away. And the Albanese government will be utterly contemptible if it goes back on this commitment because it's been pushed around by the bullies in Beijing.
But what about the repercussions? If China does take those coercive tactics, can we live with that?
Well, there are only repercussions if Beijing decides that there will be repercussions. We cannot censor ourselves in our speech or our conduct as long as we are behaving reasonably. We can't behave unreasonably, but so long as we are behaving reasonably, we cannot allow policymakers in Beijing to determine Australian policy because they threaten us and blackmail us. Saying that we want Australian or allied ownership of the Port of Darwin is perfectly reasonable. Thousands of foreign investors have had their property expropriated in China and their executives put in jail and all the rest of it. We're not going to do any of that stuff. We're not going to behave the way the PRC behaves towards foreigners it decides it doesn't like. putting them in jail, holding them as hostage, all the rest of it. And if Beijing decides that there will be repercussions over something as minimal as Australia resuming the port of Darwin after it's said that that's what it's going to do, then that would show you what all this goodwill is really worth. It's not worth 2 bob. And if they don't, give us repercussions, then we should have done it ages ago. It never should have been sold to a Chinese-owned company, and it should have been resumed under the coalition, who were utter cowards on this matter. And Albanese needs to do it now. He's been in office 3.5 years. Just do it, for goodness sake. Very often the key to a sensible relationship with Beijing is that you don't ask their permission, you just tell them what you're going to do. You give them advance notice, you're very polite, and then regardless of what they say, you just go ahead and do it, provided you're behaving reasonably.
Provided we don't have any Aussies on the ground. Thanks so much for your comments.
Well, we can't allow the threat of hostages to preclude our actions. Thanks, Lee.
Foreign editor at The Australian.